startups get successful faster. We're trying to accelerate their success, accelerate their growth, is we shared a belief that there are incredibly innovative people, entrepreneurial, driven, talented, smart, ambitious people all over the world. But their opportunity to succeed is not equally distributed. That a lot of your chance as a founder of whether or not you're going to be successful is based on just like where you live. All entrepreneurs just think differently. They're a very different creature. We've helped well over 2,500 founders. And I use the word founder because we are founder-centric. They have a startup, but I'm trying to help the founder be successful.
By giving them access to US market or just to giving them education, some kind of?
All of the above. Will you come work for me? No. Will you buy my product? No. Will you invest in my company? No. Do you like what I'm doing? No. It's just, we're really much more focused on how do you create great founders and give them the right mindset and the right skill set, and then the right mentoring and support to help them sell.
Good day, everybody. And today is our new podcast, Pro VC from Uzcard. And me, I'm Dilshad Zufarov, Chief Innovation Officer at Uzcard. And today our guest is Chris Burry, co-founder of the US Market Access Center. And with me, my colleague, Diora, and we were hosting Chris today. Chris, welcome to Uzbekistan, welcome to Tashkent, and welcome to our podcast studio. So, as I know, it's your first visit in Uzbekistan?
It is indeed my first visit here. I arrived early on Monday morning, but have been enjoying the time I've been here so far.
But you have been in Central Asia in general before?
So I'm currently based out of Tbilisi, Georgia, and have been doing a lot of stuff across the region. I've been already in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, but I'm very pleased to be able to be here for my first time in Uzbekistan and looking forward to coming back on a regular basis.
Okay. So about USMAC, US Market Access Center, could you please tell us about what is it? What is his mission? What is the strategy of USMAC? And maybe shortly about your biography, please.
Sure. So my own story is that I've been an entrepreneur pretty much all my life. Mm-hmm. I've had a whole bunch of companies, sold 3 of them. Another couple of companies I had, as we like to say in Silicon Valley, we don't like to talk in Silicon Valley about failure. The companies didn't fail. They didn't work. But that's one of the things that's unique about the place, sort of the ethos of Silicon Valley, is that the only failure is when you fail to learn. And from those companies which didn't work for me, I learned really valuable lessons that helped me be successful in follow-on companies. Had a fairly good run. I was with a company I've helped found for 10 years and left that in 2009. And in 2010, was asked to join my co-founder, Alfredo Coppola, to sort of run this organization in Silicon Valley, USMAC. And Alfredo and I both have a lot of international startup experience. We've been with our own companies around the world. And the thing that really made us say, okay, this is something important to do, is we shared a belief that there are incredibly innovative people, entrepreneurial, driven, talented, smart, ambitious people all over the world. But their opportunity to succeed is not equally distributed. That a lot of your chance as a founder of whether or not you're going to be successful is based on just like where you live. That if you're a founder in Silicon Valley or New York or London or Berlin or Paris or Singapore, your odds of success just by your geography are just remarkably different. And we sort of posed a challenge to ourselves where we said, how could we help create a world where any innovator, any founder had the opportunity to get access to everything they needed, knowledge, mentoring, resources, finances, market, anywhere in the world. We wanted their success to be dependent on them, not on their location. And our initial assumption was that one of the big problems, particularly from smaller markets like here in Uzbekistan, is that you needed access to market. The U.S. is the biggest market in the world. And our initial thought was, well, if we can just help founders around the world get access to the U.S. market, we can increase their odds of being successful. Hence the name of the organization, the U.S. Market Access Center. But what we quickly learned was that while that was part of the problem, it was not the problem. And it was almost for us like peeling back the layers of an onion, right? It's just what we quickly learned was there was a knowledge and skills gap, that there are really fundamental entrepreneurship skills that people just didn't have in other parts of the world. So in our programs, we started doing more and more instruction around sort of core entrepreneurship skills. We then realized that there's a second gap, which is there's what we would consider to be a mindset gap. Successful entrepreneurs just think differently. They're a very different creature. And as it turns out, an entrepreneurial mindset can actually be taught. And I'll come back to this later. And then we realized that there were all kinds of other gaps in terms of knowledge of sales and marketing and how do you build teams and leadership and so forth. And so while most what you would consider to be traditional accelerators are really focused on how do you help drive sales and how do you get ready to raise money, we're really much more focused on how do you create great founders and give them the right mindset and the right skill set, and then the right mentoring and support to help them sell. Because that's what our belief is that is required to be able to create great companies. Mm-hmm. And the traditional accelerator, if you go back to the very beginning, Y Combinator being the first accelerator, and they do a wonderful job. But for the most part, they're working in these resource-rich environments where there are just endless supplies of mentors, and there's lots of investors, and there's plenty of people who have built startups before, and you can find experienced co-founders. And that when you come to someplace like Tashkent, none of that's true. And so you have to sort of artificially provide these kinds of supports in a way that they're not needed in the more advanced ecosystems in a London or a New York or, any one of the top 5 or 10 ecosystems. So we run programs, and you can think of us as an accelerator in the context that we're trying to help startups get successful faster. We're trying to accelerate their success, accelerate their growth. But we're trying to work across more dimensions than sales. Sales is really important, don't get me wrong, and we do a lot of stuff about sales.
Yeah, sure.
Being able to raise money is really important, and we do a lot about how do you raise money. But if you don't have the right mindset, none of the other stuff is going to work. And if you lack those fundamental skills, none of the other stuff is going to work. And so over the last 10 years, 11 years now, we've run, close to 200 different programs in 52 countries around the world.
Wow, it's awesome.
We've helped well over 2,500 founders. And I use the word founder because we are founder-centric. They have a startup, but I'm trying to help the founder be successful.
By giving them access to US market or just to giving them education, some kind of?
All of the above.
Right.
It's It's helping them develop the right mindset, helping them develop the right skill set, helping them gain access to global markets, helping them have a global growth strategy, helping them raise money. It's just our belief is the problem that we're trying to solve for the founders is actually a more challenging problem than what most accelerators try to resolve, and it works. There's no other way to say it. If you look at our alumni have collectively raised well over $2 billion. We've had close to $2 billion in exit value. And if you look at the private value that we are aware of from companies that are, they haven't had their capital event, there's at least $7 or $8 billion in value that's still sitting out there. And this is done 100% outside of the top markets. This isn't about creating these super high growth companies in New York or London. This is about doing it in Malaysia. It's about doing it in the Czech Republic, in Georgia, and hopefully here in Uzbekistan, because we're completely sold on the idea. The talent is here. We need to give the talent the tools to enable them to succeed.
Okay. And you were talking about the mindset of entrepreneurs. How do you think the heart, the center of this mindset? What are the main characteristics of factors?
Yeah, so one of the other pieces of my life, which is very much in parallel with USMAC and very complementary, is I'm part of the entrepreneurship team at what's called the Sutardja Center for Entrepreneurship and Technology at Berkeley. And it's the largest group on the Berkeley campus that supports entrepreneurs on campus. They do the education of over 1,200 students every year, 18 to 20 classes. And they're really where we get most of our knowledge and experience around building mindset. It's their core research area. And, some of the critical areas of mindset are things like you have to, as a founder, be able to accept that it's never going to be perfect, that it needs to be good enough, right? That what we see people all over the world. It's like, I'm not going to release the product because it's not done. I'm not going I can make it better. I worked with a team in Europe, and they were brilliant engineers and scientists, and they kept, we know how to make it better. And they made it better for 4 years. And by the time they were done making it better, the market was already gone. So this idea of, in lean startup speak, what we would call the minimally viable product is really important. And that's a challenge for many people. Another one, which is also sort of related to lean startup, is the idea that your customer gets to define value, you don't. Your customer ultimately is the person who decides whether or not what you're doing is valuable. This is why we talk about what's called a value proposition. Well, the word proposition comes from the English word propose. I get to propose to you that what I'm doing is valuable to you. But you, the customer, are the only one who gets to decide it's valuable. And we see founders get stuck because they look at it and it's like, it's blue. Isn't it great that it's blue? And the customer doesn't care about that it's blue. And so it's about, one of these key mindsets is to become what we call customer-centric. That most founders start off by putting their product at the center of the universe. And rightfully so. We talk a lot in our training and in our workshops about how the product is our baby, it's our child. And like any parent, we're incredibly proud of our child. Your customer doesn't care. What your customer cares is what is the product or service going to do for them. And you need to put the customer at the center of the universe, not your product at the center of the universe. This is especially hard for people that come from a science and engineering background because they just want to talk to you about, it uses a Diffie-Hellman, whatever encryption, and you have to talk in the language of the customer. Another skill set is, entrepreneurial mindset, which translates into a skill set, is we as founders have to be highly improvisational. We just make stuff up as we go. Because when we start our company, we don't know anything. We have a bunch of guesses. And we never have the resources that we need. I don't know any founder who has ever said, I have the perfect team, perfect knowledge, access to the right customers, and access to enough money. I mean, no, maybe somebody like Elon Musk when he started the Boring Company. But, let's come back to the real world. And we have to be comfortable with the idea of I'm not going to have everything that I need. My team is imperfect. But how can I draw my team forward? How can I pull my team to a place where my team can create greater value? It is this willingness. There's a fancy word in the theory of entrepreneurship that is called effectuation. And it's really what it means is effective behavior. That really what you're focused on is, can I get the job done? And it doesn't matter if how I get the job done is a little bit messy. The question is, was it effective? Not was it beautiful, not was it optimal, but was it effective? And I'll give an example. If you go to the grocery store, there's two kinds of people who are in the grocery store. There are people who sat at home and they decided every day for the next 4 days, this is what I'm going to make for dinner. Mm-hmm. And I have the recipe for what it's going to take to make those dinners. And then I have all of the ingredients that I need to buy at the grocery store. And they go through the grocery store and they're like, pepper, check.
Was the list, yeah.
They go down the whole list. And then you have people like me who walks through the grocery store and it's like, oh, those apples look good. And I put them in the cart. And
even if you don't need it. But Apple is not on your checklist.
I don't have a checklist.
You don't have a checklist.
I don't have a checklist.
Okay.
And that looks interesting. That looks interesting. And when I get home and it's time to cook dinner, I look in the refrigerator and what's on the shelf and it's like, okay, I can take that and that and that and we can put it together and look what we made for dinner, right? Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurs are the look what we made for dinner because they never have the checklist, right? They don't. There isn't a recipe for them to. There isn't a recipe for them to follow. But you can do things to strengthen the ability to be improvisational, right? To make up stuff make up stuff as you go along. Another example of mindset is great entrepreneurs ask for help.
It's absolutely a normal situation, I think.
Most founders don't ask for help.
Oh, really?
They don't ask?
No.
They think that they don't need the help.
It's like if I somehow am asking for help, then I'm admitting that I don't know what I'm doing, right? And my pride gets in the way, right? And great founders ask for help all the time. My assumption is there is always somebody that knows this better than I do. So let me go find them and let me get input from them. And so the other one that I love is great founders have to be super comfortable with rejection. Because as a founder, you hear no all the time. Will you come work for me? No. Will you buy my product? No. Will you invest in my company? No. Do you like what I'm doing? No. It's just, your life as a founder is one of rejection. Mm. The question is, when you get rejected, how do you learn from that? There's a reason they say they won't come work for you. Your job as a founder is to ask the question, so why? And then not be upset at the answer, right? And not to become defensive about the investor or the answer. I mean, we see this with investors all the time where, founders will ask the investor, well, what do you see that's wrong with my company? Mm-hmm. And they'll say, well, we just don't think the market's big enough. And then the founder starts to argue with the investor and try to convince the investor is wrong, as opposed to trying to learn from the investor. Well, get engaged in a dialogue. And it's like, well, we see it this way. How do you see it? Because maybe I didn't do a good job of explaining the size of the market. But it is about, simplest way, I guess I would say, is about high-speed learning. Really effective entrepreneurs are constantly learning. And that's a mindset. And you can strengthen that mindset.
Okay, and how do you think what entrepreneurs can do to improve or change their mindset? Maybe any advice?
Well, the first thing is you have to understand that you have to change, mm-hmm. right? And
it's the first step.
Yes. That is always the first.
The entrepreneur should understand that he has to change.
Well, it's
the decision of the change. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we teach a module in many of our programs that is about becoming customer centric, mm-hmm. and why do you need to be customer centric? And how does it change outcomes? And then we have what we call the customer centricity toolbox, which is a whole set of tools that entrepreneurs can use to be able to get inside the head of their customer. Mm-hmm. A lot of this is from what's known as design thinking. So doing things like customer journey maps and developing customer personas and doing customer development. And it's remarkable to watch the transition. I can't tell you the number of founders that I've worked with where they, at the end of this, they come and they say, our customer is not at all who we thought our customer was. It's like, well, you just learned. And this is why this is important, right? Is you're getting inside the head of the customer. And if you've not figured out who's your customer, we have this thing we call the customer centricity toolbox, which is this wide range of tools, mostly from the design thinking area, but it's things like, how do you build customer personas? How do you do customer journey mapping? How do you do customer development interviews? Most people don't know how to do that. And when you teach it to them and we make them go out and do it, they come back and they're stunned at what it was that they learned. It changes the trajectory of their company, and ultimately it gives them a way of looking at the world. I mean, what we want them to do is not ask what we describe it as is not, don't look at the world through your product's eyes. Always look at the world through my customer's eyes. And how is my customer experiencing my product? How is my customer experiencing my service? How are they reacting? It's that but they've got to accept the idea that they have to be customer centric. If we can get them to accept that, then we can give them a whole set of tools that reinforces that. Like I talked a minute ago about the rejection thing. A lot of the work that's done at Berkeley is actually around the gamification of entrepreneurial education.
Gamification of the education.
Yes. So we play games.
Okay.
And one of the games is called rejection therapy. Okay. It's one of my favorite games.
And just before you talk about your program,
yeah,
we'd like to know more detailed about your program, about the speakers, etc. But you have talked about Berkeley. Sorry for interrupting.
This is fine.
Your opinion. We know about Berkeley ecosystem and university from YouTube or other people's. But how do you think? What is the heart, the center, the heart of the Berkeley? What do the Berkeley as the Berkeley today?
So Berkeley is an extraordinary learning community. It is an unbelievable. There's like 40,000 students. I mean,
learning of entrepreneurial
everything.
Everything.
But there's probably close to 2,000 students every year that are taking classes on entrepreneurship.
There is such kind of specific philosophy of the Berkeley.
Well, the two most famous schools in Silicon Valley are Berkeley and Stanford.
Yes.
And that there is such a history and tradition of entrepreneurship and doing startups at both of those schools. It's just in the DNA of the school.
Okay.
It's just, I don't know any other way to say it. It's almost like if you don't have an idea for a startup, you're strange. It's not if you have an idea for a startup, you're strange. It's sort of like you don't have a startup. And Berkeley also has probably the best research facilities of anywhere in the world. They have their own research facilities, and they also run a number of laboratories for the U.S. government. I mean, pretty much anything you want access to in terms of science and labs and all of that kind of stuff is there. So you do see out of Berkeley a lot more sort of science-driven startups than you would see out of Stanford. Stanford tends to be more, software kind of driven startups, but there's just such a you can't escape it, and part of that again comes to Silicon Valley is misunderstood. Silicon Valley, if you go back to when Silicon Valley sort of was named Silicon Valley, was actually just a 2-kilometer stretch of road on Highway 101 in Santa Clara. And it was in the Santa Clara Valley, and some reporter wrote a story about it and labeled it the Silicon Valley. And at the time, something like 80% of the computer chips in the world were made on that 2-3 kilometer stretch of highway. Silicon Valley ate the San Francisco Bay Area. The San Francisco Bay Area is 7 to 8 million people, depending on who you believe and where you draw the lines. The best. What's the population of Greater Tashkent?
The population of Tashkent, 3 or 4, 5 million, no?
Approximately.
Yes.
Okay, so
4 million.
4 million. So let's just say the San Francisco Bay Area is 2 times the population.
Okay.
Right. So Greater Tashkent is sort of half the size of Silicon Valley. The best guess, and no one knows for sure, But the best guess is there are probably 40,000 startups
40,000 startups
in the Bay Area. So think about if in Tashkent there were 20,000 startups. You can't escape it. I mean, I've had waiters and waitresses in restaurants pitch their idea to me. I've had the Uber driver pitch an idea. I mean, it is impossible to escape. And so both Berkeley and Stanford are just at the heart of all of that, where everybody's thinking about it. And even if you aren't thinking about it, you know somebody who's thinking about it.
You were talking about 400,000 of startups, yes?
40,000.
40,000 of startups. The question is, these startups, they are born in Silicon Valley or they are coming to Silicon Valley?
Born in Silicon Valley.
They're born in Silicon Valley. Is it the center of borning center, yes? Like
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
But there are also these startups who came, they migrated.
Yeah, a couple thousand.
Okay. Okay. So the culture is that the ecosystem is very favorable to born an idea and to start an idea and to pitch.
Yeah, and the other thing though that's fascinating is that it attracts certain people. Certain people are drawn to it. Because more than half of the founders of startups in Silicon Valley were not born in Silicon Valley. Actually, more than half of them weren't born in the U.S. It's they have somehow ended up there, and it is because it's one of the places in the world where you can find absolutely everything you need in order to be successful within 50 kilometers of where you're sitting.
Yeah.
And that attracts people from all over the world to come. It attracts students who come to university to stay. And it's not to say that people don't go and do stuff in other places. They absolutely do. But it is the ability to find mentors, find co-founders, find experts, find money, find customers. For instance, there are over 400 or 500 major corporations from around the world that have innovation offices in Silicon Valley. So like, you were saying, you're the innovation lead here, right?
But one of their representatives.
Yeah. But there's 500 companies that have a full-time person in Silicon Valley that are looking for the startup that can help their company solve a problem. And there's easily 200 corporate venture funds. And so it's not just about the people, it's about early adopters. It's about being able to find customers. And this is why at Berkeley and at Stanford, you see so many students starting companies. Because the other thing that's interesting about it is that it's okay to quit school. If you're a student at Berkeley and you have an idea for a company and you want to quit for 2 years and go try your idea, you can go try your idea for 2 years, and if it doesn't work, you just go back and finish up at Berkeley.
And it's absolutely okay?
It's 100%. It's 100% okay.
Unbelievable.
The guy who runs the Entrepreneurship Center at Berkeley, super successful entrepreneur, one of the smartest guys I know, he dropped out of Berkeley, I think, twice. Not just once. I think he did it twice. And no one cares. It's like, that's fine. And if it doesn't work, you can come back. All is okay. Same is true at Stanford. You can drop out, go try your idea. And, I know people who dropped out from university, went and did their company. 7 years later, they sold their company, super successful, and they went back to Berkeley or Stanford and finished their degree. Mm. Not because they needed to finish their degree, but because they wanted to. There's a very different relationship with risk and a very different relationship with, as I say, we talk about, it failed, but what we're really saying when it failed is that it didn't work. There isn't the shame or I don't know what else to say. I mean, in a lot of parts of the world, if your company didn't work, everybody's like,
it's like a shame. Yeah.
It's a shame. It's like, oh, there must be something wrong with him, or must be something wrong with her, or,
there is no tolerance to risk.
There's no tolerance. And in Silicon Valley, really the only thing anybody cares about is did you learn something? Mm. And they come to you and say, oh, Chris, how's the startup going? And you'd be like, it didn't really work. And they're like, well, what are you doing now? It's because there is a deep understanding that most startups fail. I mean, that's just the reality. And a lot of people, they're not successful until their second, third, fourth startup. Mm-hmm. It's actually very rare that someone is successful with their first startup. And it's also, so the company Slack.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Super big, super successful. Yeah. Slack was born from failure.
Can you give more detailed information about it?
Yeah. So Slack originally started as a gaming company. And they got a bunch of investor money, and the investor, here you go, everybody's really excited. And the team at Slack figured out that it wasn't going to work. It's like, okay, looked good, but now it's not. So, okay. And they actually went back to the investors and said, we didn't spend all the money. We want to give you the money back. And Slack's investors were like, no, keep the money. Because you're going to have another idea. Mm-hmm. And use the money for whatever the other idea is.
It's really cool.
And the guys at Slack were like, And they were thinking about it. And it's like, well, we had developed this tool that would allow people in the game to communicate with each other. And we ended up using it as a way to communicate amongst ourselves on our team. What if we repurposed it? Mm-hmm. And we used it as a team communication tool. That's how Slack was born. Slack was the direct outcome of a failed experiment. But the attitude of the investors is part of it also, which was, I don't want my money back. You keep the money. Just come up with a better idea. And there's 50 stories like that. I mean, even if you look at PayPal, mm-hmm. Huge early success in sort of internet, right? And unbelievable founders. Elon Musk was one of the founders, Peter Thiel. I mean, there's actually what in Silicon Valley they call the PayPal mafia, which are the founders and the companies they went on and founded and everything. Their first idea wasn't what PayPal was. Their first idea was it was something like encryption software for handhelds. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, that didn't work. Then they had another idea. Oh, that didn't work. We talk about this as going from plan A to plan B to plan C, plan G, E, And PayPal as a payment platform was Plan G. And here you have some of the people who are viewed as being historically just some of the best and the brightest of a generation of entrepreneurs. It was Plan G. But what they did is every time they went from B to C to D to E was they were learning. And this is why this idea of high-speed learning and high-speed iteration is so unbelievably important. And there's who is it? It's author Ash Maria has a book called, he's another one of the lean startup guys. He's responsible for what's called the lean canvas. And he talks about it as getting from plan A to a plan that works. And excuse me, how do you go through this? How do you go through this iteration process?
So the main idea is to be flexible, as I understood.
Don't fall in love with your idea.
Sure.
You know, it's beautiful. Okay, now what? And you know, I even look at the history of USMAC. We started with the idea that, well, we just needed to provide access to the U.S. market. And yes, startups from around the world need that. But that was not enough. And then we learned more. It was like, that's not enough. That's not enough. And we learn every day.
So we talked about USMAC, about activities, goals, and our favorite topic is COVID-19. So what is the impact of COVID-19 on USMAC, on US market, on Silicon Valley?
Oh. So COVID, the pandemic, caused unbelievable pain and suffering around the world. Millions of people died, millions sick. I mean, I don't want to downplay the negative, but for startups, it's an unbelievably amazing thing.
Possibility.
What?
Possibility.
Yeah, because
it was a great chance for them.
Well, so where most great startups are founded is when there is some kind of a shift that happens. My friend Ken Singer, who runs the Center for Entrepreneurship at Berkeley, this is his big idea. So, Ken, I'm sorry I'm stealing your idea. But there could be a technical shift. So, for instance, one of the big technical shifts of the last 30 years or whatever was the U.S. government deciding to make the global positioning system available to the public. So there's now this technology that's available that lets you on your phone know within 10 meters where you are. Well, the emergence of that technology opens up all kinds of possibilities that were not possible in that same way before. The advent of the smartphone, same thing, opens up enormous possibilities. So there's technology shifts that happen. There's market shifts that happen. Market shifts are often driven by changes in consumer behavior. You go back to the late 90s, ordering stuff online was kind of weird. It wasn't sort of a thing. It was like the beginnings of e-commerce. You go now to the pandemic. The pandemic has basically completed that shift in consumer behavior where ordering stuff not online seems strange, right? You had people, you look at the rise of all of the delivery services. Well, grocery delivery, restaurant delivery, all of that. There was some of that before, but the pandemic because people were stuck at home and they couldn't get out and they were scared to go out for, there was lockdowns and all of this stuff. So it caused that kind of a shift. So you look at things like the rise of all of these delivery services. Before the pandemic, you could order some stuff and it could, food or whatever, it would be delivered. Now you have all over the world, you can have your groceries delivered, you have food delivered, you can have things from the pharmacy delivered. The impact on behavior of people, the effect of lockdowns and all of that kind of stuff, it created enormous opportunities that were not there before. You look at the rise of like Zoom.
Yes.
Zoom was a 10-year overnight success. Zoom was around for, 8-9 years before the pandemic. And then all of a sudden, wow, everybody needs to have group video conferencing. Wow. And boom. You look at the virtual events platforms, you look at like a Verbella or a Hopin or whatever, because people couldn't go to events. And the COVID pandemic sort of, it moved everything almost at once. It's like it took the whole world and like shook it up. And now all the pieces are rearranged. And that creates opportunity for startups, because the shift creates a gap between what is currently possible and what the market wants and needs. And it's the startups historically that then go in to fill that gap. And you can go back 50 years in the tech industry, and every major crisis led to the creation of great companies. Cisco was founded during an economic crisis.
Yes.
You can go all the way back. And then you can even look at things like the 2008 economic crisis, the global economic meltdown in 2008, is what really enabled the whole software as a service, everything as a service. Because up until then, the chief information officers of the big companies were just like, well, I don't want to trust it to other people. I don't want to put my data somewhere else. I just want to buy more servers, and I'm going to put them in my own data center and everything. And their bosses called them up one day and said, you can't spend any more capital. And they're like, what do we do? I can't spend any capital. Well, by going to the cloud, I don't spend capital. It's just an operating expense. And it was the CFOs pushing down on the CIOs around the global economic crisis that led to Salesforce becoming what it is, and all of these different SaaS platforms and Amazon Web Services and so forth. And COVID just shook the box. And I don't think we've seen even half of what's going to come out of it from a tech standpoint, because people's expectations around how they're going to live their life has been fundamentally altered. And businesses and technology have not caught up to that new reality yet.
Let's talk about the program, acceleration program of USMAC.
Yes.
That we are planning to launch together. It's dedicated for Central Asian startups. Could you tell about more undetailed what will be the program? Who will be the speakers? And what will founders of startup will learn after the finishing of the program?
Okay. So our programs are built off of the following kinds of modules. One is we do workshop/lecture kind of thing where we introduce an idea to the founders. It could be this idea of becoming customer-centric. It could be around how do you create a structured value proposition. And then what we do is we assign homework, which is around how do you take this concept and apply it back to your own company? It's about the immediate application of learning to move from theory, not just to practice, but to practice in your own specific case. We then do typically what we would call group feedback sessions, where we will divide into smaller groups, and a super experienced entrepreneur who's built and scaled companies asks everybody to present their homework. And the idea is I get feedback from the mentor on my homework, but I'm actually learning more from listening to the feedback on other people's homework. Because what we've learned over time is because we love our baby, it's really hard to hear things about our baby. And if I'm hearing it about somebody else's baby, I can be like, oh, yeah. And then it's like, oh, no, I'm doing that too. And so people are learning from each other, but we also encourage the founders to provide feedback to each other. It's not just the professor telling you did it wrong. Because one of the outcomes we want from the program is to create a learning community among the founders who are in the program, who over time have the ability to help. Because there's a day when the program is over, and we want that community to exist in such a way that you're not just left on your own. Because being a founder is honestly incredibly lonely, because nobody understands what it's like. Nobody understands what it's all about. We will teach a whole series of modules. We will do some work around mindset. We will do some work around customer and about how do you really define your customer and really understand in depth what the customer is all about, and specifically talk about how that may change from market to market. Because if you're going to be a global company, customer behavior in different markets is going to be different. And one of the biggest mistakes founders make when they're trying to go global is that they assume everything is the same. And so it's to give them a set of tools to be able to understand how different markets are different. We'll also spend a considerable amount of time, and this may seem strange, but we're going to spend a considerable amount of time on storytelling. Mm-hmm. Because storytelling is the single most effective way of communicating. Doesn't matter what the culture is. It's why you go back 10,000 years in any culture and there are stories. And the way you need to communicate to customers and the way that you need to communicate to investors is actually to not drown them in facts, but to share with them the story that's supported by the facts. And where so many founders go wrong is they just think, if I can just drown you in facts, if I can just present, this many, this is not a university research paper. This is about being persuasive. Sales is about persuasion. Raising money is about persuasion. You are trying to sell the investor on the idea of investing in your company. And so we will spend a fair amount of time on that. I teach some of the modules. All of our modules are taught by people who have actually lived the journey. One of our rules is you could have read the book, that's fine. But if you haven't lived it, you're not valuable to the entrepreneur. Because where the real value comes is honestly from the stories that the people that are teaching the class are able to tell. I teach a module that is on what we call cross-cultural communication. which is how are communication styles different around the world? And in one of my companies, I basically completely messed up because I didn't know enough about different communication styles around the world. And I wasted an awful amount of money from the company and was one of the most uncomfortable board meetings I've ever been in, where I had to go explain to the board about how I'd basically wasted $1 million. That's just not a good day. But when I teach that, it's from the heart. It's from the, let me share with you what I learned, and let me share with you how you cannot make that mistake, right? And we have a pool of many, many people. And so one of the things that we also try to do is align instructors on these topics with people that have some kind of industry knowledge. So this is primarily for fintechs. So we'll be looking for people that can come in and help teach that actually have built a fintech. Because again, it is about the ability, it's about the ability to transfer knowledge. It's about the ability to transfer knowledge and experience from people who have done it before to the people who are trying to do it now, so that they find new ways to screw up, not the ways I screwed up. And the consistent feedback we get is that the training modules are nice. They're good, they're interesting, they're valuable, and so forth. Okay. But it's the group and one-on-one interactions, which is where the magic lives. And it's a lot of fun because you can almost see what we call the light bulb moment. It's like they're like, wow, I now get it.
You were talking about that your program has a big history of traction in other countries.
Yes.
And my question is, how do you think the main difference or discrepancy between Silicon Valley entrepreneurship mindset and in other countries? What is the main difference that you see from your experience? Maybe this my question is linked to about what we were talking before podcast about start global or start local and global or board global.
So in no particular order, the first thing that's very different is the level of ambition.
Okay, it's the level of ambition.
Silicon Valley founders start with the assumption that they're going to conquer the world.
To conquer the world. Okay.
I'm going to go we're going to own the universe. I mean, we're going to conquer, we're not only going to conquer the world, we're going to conquer Mars too. It is, we're going to be big. We're going to be $1 billion. We're going to be, and you go to these other places around the world, and that level of ambition may live there, but it's beaten out of the founders. They're just told over and over again, don't think that big. Who are you to think that you're going to conquer the world? Remember, and this is everywhere. I mean, we ran a bunch of programs in Ireland. And I had a conversation with one of the founders of our companies that we worked with in Ireland maybe 1.5 years ago. And he said, Chris, I remember you were doing you were doing interviews as part of the application to be part of the program. And I remember you asked me, well, in terms of revenue, how big is your company going to be 2, 3, 4 years from now? What I was really trying to get a sense of was what was his sense of ambition. And I remember he was like, it's like he was scared to answer the question. And he said, 5 million. I'm going to be 5 million euros. And then it was almost like he was waiting for me to tell him he was an idiot. And he says, Chris, I remember you looked at me and you sort of tipped your head to the side and you said, why isn't there another zero behind that? And he said, I went home that night and I couldn't sleep because I was asking myself, why isn't there another zero behind that? 5 years later, his company's doing great. They have customers in more than 30 states in the United States. Just doing great. And when I was chatting with him and he was telling me this story, he looked at me and he said, and you know what? Recently as a team, we've been thinking about how do we add another zero. And I'm like, yeah, that's the way it's done, right? Founders around the world, most founders just think in terms of, well, I can go and I can win in my local market and maybe I can go next door to Kyrgyzstan or, as opposed to asking the question, what is it going to take to conquer the world? And this is important because it makes you ask yourself different questions. It makes you ask different questions about what's the product that you build? How fast do you expand globally? How much money do you need to raise? What's the skills of the team I need to assemble? So this question of ambition is, I think, really one of the fundamental differences between what you see in Silicon Valley and some of the other major tech hubs and the less developed tech hubs. That's one. The second big difference that I see is the lack of customer focus. In Silicon Valley, everybody's customer centric. Everybody, it's the default starting point. And in most other places around the world, it's not the default. It's not the default starting point. And if you're gonna go take over the world, you need to understand deeply what the customer wants. The last thing, and I make this different than ambition, it's around what I would call a belief in self. We as founders have to be more than a little bit crazy. I often start, like if I'm doing a keynote at a conference or something, I often start by saying, I want to share with you a secret. And the secret is I'm nuts. I'm absolutely insane. And because I think I can change the world. I go back to at the beginning of the podcast, I was talking about Alfredo and I saying, how are we going to create a world where it doesn't matter where the founder lives, that their success is based on it? There was an old commercial from Apple. When Apple first came out, I think it was with the Macintosh. And the title of it was, Here's to the Crazy Ones. And it finishes with the line that, again, here's to the crazy ones who believe they can actually change the world. Because it's the crazy ones who actually do. But that degree of crazy requires a pretty intense level of self-belief. And part of our job is to instill in the founders that sense of belief. It goes back to my Irish friend, right? Where he went home that night and it was like, yeah, why isn't there another, why isn't there another zero?
Yes.
So is it your advice to founders to be insane and believe in yourself?
Well, we have to be crazy because you're embarking on a journey that on a really good day has a 90% chance it's not going to work. On a really good day, 1 out of 10, it's gonna be okay. And you think that's a good idea. And the only way it's a good idea is if you have extraordinary belief in self and extraordinary belief in the team that you have the ability to put around you. And there's a balancing act, which is you have to be crazy and a realist at the same time. You can't just live in crazy land. You sort of have to live in crazy land and reality at the same moment, without actually going crazy. Which, my advice to founders is don't focus on all the things that are in your way. If you think about everything that could possibly stop you, you'll never start.
Or control, yeah.
But be focused on being effective. This goes back to what I was talking about, right? In terms of effective thinking. Be super focused on how can I be effective? You've got to be able to live, as I was saying, you got to be able to live in this sort of fantasy, crazy land while also being grounded in reality. But you can't just look at all the reasons why you can't win, why you can't succeed. You've got to become focused on what we talked about earlier in the podcast about this sort of effectuation, this effective action. What's the next thing I can do with what I know and what I have at hand to be able to move me closer to success? And wake up tomorrow and ask yourself that same question, that same question again and over again. How do I today get a little bit closer to being successful and stay crazy? When you lose the crazy, your chances of success go down. But you also got to stay real.
It's good motivation. Very good motivational expressions. My last question about the industries. So how do you think, Chris, in today's world, which industry has the most opportunity? We know about fintech, medtech, edtech, or in others, and maybe industries and with technology.
So I think there's almost endless opportunities right now in fintech.
Less.
No, almost infinite.
Okay. Infinite. Okay.
Almost infinite opportunities in fintech. That is an industry that has been so stuck for so long, and there's so many different things that can be done. There's lots of stuff going on in AI. I think AI is rapidly becoming just part of what's baked into everything. That if you're doing something and you don't have some real AI component, you're probably not doing it right. I think we're close to what I would consider a blockchain moment. And I'm not talking about cryptocurrency. I'm talking about the actual use of blockchain in the enterprise to do enterprise stuff, to do smart contracts, traceability. It's just we're sort of at the point where the technology is mature enough and people know enough about how to make the technology work I also think that this whole Internet of Things, sort of, it was hyped for a while. Everybody's sort of a little bit down. I think we're sort of on the uptick again on the Internet of Things, where it's just the ability to collect data is going to change so much. This goes hand in hand with AI. But I also think that you're going to see a lot more of computational power being pushed to the edge. You're going to see a lot more edge applications but this is just the ongoing back and forth in the computer industry. At the very beginning, you had mainframes and everything was centralized. And then you had client server and everything was decentralized. And then you had the cloud where everything's centralized. And now you're going back to the edge. But there's so much stuff about being able to apply, process, collect the data, process the data, act on the data at the point of collection that is going to change how so many different things work.
So, Chris, thank you very much for your time, for your motivational and very motivational expressions. And as the timing is now to close our podcast, thank you. We wish you a good staying in Tashkent.
Thank you so much.
And we hope you see again in Tashkent.
Oh, I will absolutely be back.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for your time. It was amazing. It was really interesting conversation. So, and in the future, I truly believe that we will implement programs with USMAC offline here or in America.
Great. I'm so looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.